It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law and the 7th annual Judge Bruce Meyerson Lecture Series. This event every year is made possible by the generosity of Judge Meyerson and Mary Ellen Simonson. And this event gives us an opportunity to celebrate and to showcase some of our nation's leading practitioners, government officials, and also scholars in the area of dispute resolution. Having Professor Sheila Heen here with us tonight to join us from Harvard, she's doing the honor of delivering this lecture this evening, and it's a real treat for us as well as something that we're quite grateful to her for. So thank you for being with us, Sheila. It's also something that we're quite grateful for, and that is the long-term friendship and support of Judge Meyerson and Mary Ellen. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to get to learn about their impressive collective careers, I want to take just a moment to introduce both of them this evening and publicly thank them for their ongoing support. Judge Meyerson has had a distinguished career. Most dear to our heart here in the building is that he has spent the last 3 decades teaching dispute resolution courses for us here at the law school. In addition to being a distinguished attorney and appellate judge, he also is a very well-respected mediator and arbitrator. And so the theme of this event tracks so well in what he's most known for in this circle. Also consistent with this theme, I wanted to make the introduction of Mary Ellen Simonson, one of our alumni from ASU Law. And she also has had a very distinguished career. She's a partner in the law firm Lewis Rocha here in Phoenix, and has been both a lawyer and a leader in the fields of education law as well as labor and employment law. Although this event each year is a signature event for our entire law school, it is brought to us by the Lodestar Dispute Resolution Center. And that center is really important for the national reputation of our law school. It has grown over the years to become a center of excellence that has reached a national stature that brings attention in a very positive way to our law school. But the reach of this center is increasingly international as well. And so I want to thank Professor Art Hinshaw for his leadership. And at this point, I'll bring him to the podium. He's the faculty director of the Lodestar Center, and he'll kick off the rest of the event for us. But we appreciate your presence and your attention, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Art Hinshaw, Dean Leeds. Thank you very much. Safe travels. I don't know if you follow Dean Leeds on social media or anything along those lines, but she is a Where's Waldo kind of person. Like, she is here, there, and everywhere all the time. This is the 7th annual Meyerson Lecture. I'm really proud to say that because this came from an idea on essentially the back of a napkin at a Thai basil restaurant not far from here. And look where we are, year 7, and we've had unbelievably fantastic speakers every year that we've been here. We're just so lucky to get people of this caliber, including this year's speaker, Sheila Heen. One thing that I want to do is I want to acknowledge that an event like this does not happen without good work from a lot of people, so I want to acknowledge those folks, and I'm going to ask you all to hold off on your applause until the end. So thank yous go to the staff of the Lodestar Center. You met some of them outside, Christine Carmichael and Justine, now I'm blank, Monroe, Justine Monroe. She just started with us a little bit ago, so I'm still learning. It takes me a while to get names. I'm really bad at that. It's one of my improvement areas, I understand. And then Jay Jenkins, who is our executive director. By the way, my students who are here will acknowledge that this happens regularly. So nice to see you from Negotiation, Mediation Clinic, graduates of the Mediation Clinic. Thank you for being here. Our event staff, Austin Prutch, who's the head of it, Alina McNeil, and Laura Tobler, who just started with us this week, I think. Also our IT team, Corey Caswell and Eddie Garcia. Now, I want to introduce a couple other people here. I saw that Lois Savage is here. So she's the executive director of the Lodestar Foundation, who has been supporting our work for, I want to say, 25 years. So thank you very much for all that the Lodestar Foundation has done for us. And of course, Bruce Meyerson and Mary Ellen Simonson. Thank you to you for endowing this lecture, to your families for coming and supporting this. It truly is one of the treats working with you, Bruce, to figure out who are we going to get, go through the lists and all that kind of stuff. I really enjoy the time that we spend together. Thank you for your mentorship and friendship. I appreciate it. By the way, Bruce interviewed me when I was hired here 20 years ago, just so you know. I am not a suck-up. All right, so Sheila Heen. What can we say about Sheila Heen? So Sheila Heen is the Thaddeus Beale Professor of Practice at Harvard Law School and the Deputy Director of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. Now, I had mentioned to a group at lunchtime today that this is where sort of the brainchild of the foundation of negotiation theory post-World War II occurred. That's where it began, right? And we were talking earlier today about some of the books that she's written. This being one of them, one of my favorite books of all time. I'm going to talk about this in detail in just a second. But at lunchtime today, she was talking with students, and she was highlighting her book that you should get if you aren't familiar with it. Thanks for the feedback, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback. Well, not giving feedback, receiving feedback. Why is that? Most of us are really nervous about receiving feedback. And it goes through this whole categorization. It's fantastic. Get it. I think that it's on Amazon. I should see some people doing this on their phones in the next minute or two. But she's here to talk about difficult conversations, which this is the original copy that came out in 1999. And you can see that my copy is well loved. I've slept with it under my pillow at times because I'm trying to absorb the knowledge that's in it. So this book is now in its third edition. That's what you got when you walked in. We offered 100 free copies. We gave them out, and we didn't have copies to spare. So thank you for coming and getting those books. It's a really, really good book. So I'm just going to tell you, this is a book. These are the chapter titles of the original, the chapter titles. All right. Shift to a Learning Stance. The Feelings Conversation. The Identity Conversation. Create a Learning Conversation. There are lots of micro skills. And so when I was first starting out in this field, I worked for the University of Missouri, and I was doing I created a mediation program for the entire university that was then adopted to the whole system. If you don't know, 4 universities, Kansas City, St. Louis, Columbia, Missouri, and Rolla, Missouri S&T, Science and Technology. And I was doing stuff, and my supervisor, who was basically vice system president, said, "What can we do to support your program besides spend $1 million? What's something we can do that we could do?" And I said, "Buy this book." And he's like, "Okay." And I said, "No, I'm serious. Buy this book so we can hand it out." And he said, "Tell me about the book." So I told him about the book, and he's like, "Who wrote it?" And I was like, "Lawyers from Harvard Law School." And he's like, "Okay, I'll get a copy and I'll read it. I'll be back in touch with you." And I thought, oh, well, there you go. And 2 weeks later, he comes and he said, "Are you sure that lawyers wrote The Feelings Conversation? Are you sure that lawyers wrote The Identity Conversation?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is really good." And he's like, "Yeah, how many do you need?" I was like, "Oh, maybe 200. He's like, "How about 400? I said, "I'll take 400. And I started giving, this program was really designed to solve conflict. But what I found is that people came to me, to talk about how do I work my way through a situation. We were advising much more than we were doing other things, and I was giving these books out like candy to people. And I would get communications back, "Thank you so much for this book. It is so helpful." So if you don't have this book, I presume you have it because you're already here. But do get it, and do get the book. Thanks for the feedback. Now, the other thing, I'm almost done, I promise. The other thing is that this book, because of the micro skills, because of the macro thinking about it, has probably spawned more continuing education programs for the dispute resolution community and lawyers. Well, next to Getting to Yes, which is the book, right, that got us started. So this would be number 2. This is rarefied air, what you just got for free. It's worth every penny Bruce spent for it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure, Sheila Heen.
Oh, let me turn on my mic. That's the first step. Thank you so much for coming, and what an incredibly generous introduction. It is true, speaking of feedback, that when the book came out in 1999, Amazon was a relatively new phenomenon. And so we were anxiously watching what was going to happen on this new thing called Amazon. And within a few days, the first review popped up. 1 star. And the only comment was, "What do a bunch of lawyers know about human beings?" And I thought, well, I don't know, read the book and then tell us. Did we get it right? But the idea that we were qualified in any way to talk about human beings and our relationships with each other was not an unusual stance, especially then. And part of what I feel the legal profession is about is actually helping human beings in the moments that matter to them. So we're going to talk a little bit about difficult conversations, particularly in polarized times, because as you may have heard, we at Harvard have that all figured out. And it's just a sea of tranquility over there in Cambridge these days. But this has been an incredibly large focus of what we've been wrestling with ourselves on campus. It's a big focus of Dean John Manning's tenure, is actually equipping people to go out and lead in challenging times, and to equip them to have the people skills that they need to do that, as well as the legal acumen to do that. So negotiation is now required for graduation at Harvard, which puts a big agenda in front of us, which is wonderful. So what do we want to do tonight? I thought that tonight we would actually do a bunch of interaction and conversation as we talk about what we've each noticed going on. And I thought maybe we would just start with a quiz. Sound good? Sure. All right, so I'm going to show you a little movie. And the quiz question is, what is happening here? That's it. It was a low-budget production. So what do you think? What's happening here? Who wants to start? How would you describe what you just saw?
Big ball chasing a small ball.
It's a big ball chasing a small ball. Love it. Anybody have anything else?
Low ball.
Say it again.
Low ball and high ball.
Low ball and high ball doing what?
Chasing.
Chasing. They're chasing. Yeah, go ahead.
Small ball leading a big ball.
Oh, the small ball is leading the big ball. Love that. Anything else? Yeah, up in the back.
Two balls traveling together.
2 balls traveling together. Okay, so let's just start by saying these are great stories. He's closest to right. These balls are not chasing and they're not leading. They're just 2 shapes moving across a screen. But as human beings, we want a story. So we immediately attribute to the balls personalities and drama. And by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're telling a bedtime story to a kid and you start with, once upon a time, there were 2 shapes moving across a screen. You are a terrible storyteller, okay? But if you tell a bedtime story that says, once upon a time, there was a big ball that was chasing a little ball, now we've got something going on that is interesting, right? The problem for all of us, of course, is that in conflict with each other people's intentions, well, first of all, they're not circles. They actually do have intentions. And their intentions are invisible to us, but we are wired to attribute intentions. This little movie, by the way, with the two circles moving across the screen, is drawn from the earliest work that at least I'm aware of early attribution theory, done in 1944 in Austria. And it was really taking a look at human beings' propensity to attribute intentions to even inanimate objects, but certainly in conflict, I'm going to attribute intentions to you based on the impact you're having on me. And over time, as the relationship frays and gets worse and worse, I'm more and more likely to tell a negative story. And what I would say is that, in fact, intentions start to become characteristics about you. And characteristics start to become character. Because now I know what kind of person that you are. And just seeing your name in my inbox triggers a reaction. How many of you have people whose name showing up in your inbox triggers a reaction? Yes, exactly. Are they sitting next to you? You can give them the feedback, really. So let me say just a little bit more about where I am coming from on this question of polarization. Because in addition to all of this stuff and teaching for a long time, as well as working with clients, I also live, confession time, in a mixed political marriage. So our front yard in 2008 had a McCain sign and an Obama sign. And we live on a very main road in the small New England town where we live. And we got so many questions about it that we finally just slapped a his and hers on them. By 2012, once you called to order a sign, they would send you the whole party slate, right? So we ended up having to divide the front yard into left and right. And we just put them on, there was like a whole slew on each side with Mitt and Obama in the middle. And of course, after this very close election, we thought we would share our reactions. So part of what has been interesting for me and challenging for me has been noticing the ways in which this conversation within my own home has evolved. And part of what has evolved in the last few years, we did not have signs, by the way, in 2016. Partly because of how each of us felt about having just the other person's sign in the yard. And if we had put two signs in the yard, and I actually suggested this, although we didn't execute it, I thought the two signs would basically say, not him and not her. Because I do think 2016 was an anti-vote, right? It was who you didn't want more for whatever reason that was. And so part of what's been interesting to me is just to notice the way that political conversations have changed. And so one of the ways that I think about this, or I'm starting to think about this, and by the way, politics is not my specialty. So part of the journey just to get ready for this conversation has been thinking about how do we think about applying the lessons from difficult conversations in this arena. So where do conversations happen in this arena? Well, let's just start with the self. Trying to figure out what you actually believe, who you feel affiliated with or aligned with, et cetera. And by the way, how those views change over time. How many of you have had a view on a topic of public concern, what we would call a political topic? How many of you have had at least one of those shift over the years of your life? Yeah, so that happens for most of us. It often happens very slowly as well. So this is a conversation with ourselves also about how our life experience is starting to shift how we feel about things or how we see different things. Around that are the conversations that we have with our closest family and friends. And then outside of that are conversations in our communities. This should probably be plural, right? Our local neighborhood communities, our city, town, and state communities, our professional communities, as we tackle problems together or just talk with each other about current issues of the day and what's unfolding. Outside of that is then what we might term public discourse. So these are talking heads on TV. This is the way things are described in the newspaper. Remember when there were newspapers? Yeah. et cetera. And then kind of on the outside of that is commentary from outside, let's say the United States, which is what we're talking about in this case, about us. So here's what I'm noticing that's happening, and you guys might have different observations. The conversation today feels more like this, right? The public discourse has become extremely polarized and extreme, meaning what gets fed to us or amplified tends to be the things that are more extreme. The news sources are segregated. The outrage factor is what means things get selected to be amplified. And so if you are more extreme, you're more likely to get retweeted or reposted, et cetera. And also covert international players, those boundaries, right? TikTok is owned by bots, and I just learned tonight, some newspapers, local newspapers are being bought by Russia, yeah. And so you have international players who are behaving like people on Facebook posting things, right? And so you've got a blurred set of lines between the international outside community and our public discourse inside the United States. That gets replicated then in our community conversations, partly in our friend conversations, because our friends now on Facebook, we get fed amplified versions of whatever we gravitate to, so that friends of friends who are posting things that agree with us get pushed to us, et cetera, right? And then you've got your individual actual friends and family. You kind of know, well, who's voting for who, and that, how many of you have felt like your inner circle has also been a little bit estranged or alienated or cautious about talking about it? Yeah, exactly. And then that we're caught in the middle. And whether or not you're in the middle, so maybe you're very clearly on one side or the other, but the question of where do you stand on any issue of the day? The issue comes up and you are expected to for or against. And you better post about it and you better do it quick or you're being complacent. And so I feel like what's in vogue right now is that you have to take a stand on things, and often things that aren't necessarily black or white, right? So having a nuanced perspective is not particularly valued at the moment, even as reality has not changed and is complicated and actually nuanced. And so I think these forces have made this harder for us to actually have conversations at all of these levels. At least these are some of my observations. So what does this produce in terms of impacts? A few things. First of all, the trusted information sources. So by the way, sometimes people say, well, the problem is we can't agree on the facts. And the problem is the facts or the alternative facts or the fake news or whatever. I actually think it's not really about the facts, but it is about who do you trust. What sources do you trust for your information? And that has become very bifurcated. Started with, I'm told, it started with sort of talk radio, et cetera, and then amplified through social media, Fox News, CNN, et cetera. So this question of we're getting our news from different sources, we have fewer shared spaces, you're supposed to take categorical stands, and there's mutual judgment of each other. And then just human beings don't like conflict. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's been true for a very long time. How many of you feel like I probably would put myself on toward the side of preferring to avoid conflict? Yeah, so given that the conflict has become very loud, particularly, it drives us to try to avoid, because what's the point? So there's a question about whether we are as polarized as we think we are. We'll come back to that. But there definitely is growing affective polarization in terms of mutual dislike and mistrust between the two. And there are a growing gap of perceptions about the other side and what they actually believe. So just to draw from some studies, and by the way, at the very end of this, I'll give you all the sources so that you can do more reading if you're interested. So in terms of affective polarization, these are the ways that people describe the other side. Talk about characteristics becoming character. In addition, they're so terrible that the other side is a threat to the existence of our well-being. This is from Pew. And our understanding of what the other side actually believes, there's been a growing gap. And what I think is most interesting about this is that the most engaged people on each side, so those are those ones on the end, devoted conservatives, progressive activists, these are people who are very engaged with politics. They're the ones who have the biggest misperceptions of what the other side believes. The ones who have the most accurate perceptions of what each side believes tend to be the ones who are politically disengaged in the middle. Because I think because they're sitting in that third seat where you see the ways in which both sides are ridiculous, but actually both sides have some good points also, right? So maybe they just have a more balanced view, I don't know. So this is the last piece of it, which is when you put like-minded people together and you invite them to talk about the thing, the issue that they are like-minded about, each of those individual people come out of that group conversation registering more extreme views in the direction in which they were like-minded. So groups actually exacerbate the polarization. Now, we can talk about why that is. There are a bunch of theories about why that is. Maybe it's because now that I know that you agree with me, well, then I must be right. Maybe it's because in order to fit in this group, clearly, like, I need to kind of adopt some of the slightly more exaggerated views. We don't totally know. But that is one of the phenomenons. This takes us back to something that's in the difficult conversations, which is the ladder of inference. And the ladder of inference was created at MIT and Harvard, and it's just mapping the way that our brains take in and process information. So at the very bottom of the ladder is available data. And by available data, what the creators of the ladder mean is just anything you can directly observe, see, smell, touch, feel, hear in life. In any given moment in our lives, there's actually just too much going on for us to take in everything, right? So right now, you could be looking at the screen, you could be listening to the background noise, you could be noticing what people are wearing, you could be counting lights on the ceiling. So you automatically are assuming, well, what should I select to pay attention to, and what can I safely ignore? I had a colleague who mentioned how many ceiling tiles were on the ceiling while teaching this content. And a guy in the back said, 432. Which is a bad moment for a presenter. You know, like, okay, so like, why are you paying attention to that instead of listening to me? So my friend Stevenson just blurted out, okay, why do you know that? And the guy said, I don't know that I knew it until you asked, but I used to sell ceiling tiles. Right? So anytime I walk in a room, drives my family crazy, 18 boxes. Right? And I wonder if I'm going to fail at this job like I failed at that job. He's having a whole conversation at the back of the room about something that nobody else is paying attention to. This is true in American life. And as you watch the news, what do you notice in a meeting? You notice the things you're interested in, you notice the things that are relevant to you, etc. You notice how many women versus men speak. The guy next to you doesn't notice that maybe, or maybe he does notice that, but doesn't notice how often people are making dismissive jokes that are relevant to something he identifies with, professionally or personally. And so often we come out of meetings, and in some sense we attended different meetings because we paid attention to different things about what happened. Whatever it is that we each select, we then filter it through reasoning and interpretations based on our past experience. How big a deal is this? What do I make of this? What do I predict about the future based on what I'm seeing? And we come to conclusions. Now, these conclusions are really far apart, even when the data can be closer. Maybe these actually should have been reversed so that they're going away from each other. That probably would have been a better visual. I'm giving myself that feedback. But what's interesting is that partly because of the news sources and partly because of human nature, once you have a conclusion about something, what do you select to pay attention to? Things that confirm that conclusion. So once you think someone is incompetent, what do you notice about them? All the things they're screwing up. If you think somebody is great and they screw something up, what do you think? It was an anomaly. They were probably just busy. It'll be fine, right? So you get a halo effect that lasts sometimes a little too long, or you get a damning effect where we are each self-selecting data that confirms our worldviews. And when it comes to politics, it needs to fit the narrative that's being fostered for what's going on. And so these are actually quite difficult to break. So there are a bunch of studies about giving people new information that is inconsistent with their view and how quick we are, all of us, let's not say them, let's say us, we are to rationalize or dismiss it as it must be an anomaly or minimize it in some way. All right, so in difficult conversations, we talk about what people's internal voices are busy doing in conflict, and I'm just gonna briefly name them before we do a couple more exercises, because you'll see echoes of a lot of this, or connections, I think. In any difficult conversation, what our internal voices are busy thinking about. So your internal voice is what you think and feel but don't say. Each of us has one. It does running commentary on your life. Just find yours right now. Just thinking, that's kind of interesting, but I don't have an internal voice. That would be your internal voice. You found it. So it turns out that in a difficult conversation, what our internal voices are preoccupied with is actually quite predictable. So you can bucket them into three categories that Art mentioned. One is the quote-unquote facts, or what happened. And that's our story about who's right, and in particular what I'm right about, whose fault it is that we're having this problem, and what the other person's intentions or motivations are. Why are they being this way? Why are they doing what they're doing? Because of attribution theory, right? The second, underlying that, is feelings. What do I do with the feelings that I have here? How do I understand them, first of all? And then also, how do I make sure, maybe in a professional context, that I don't get emotional, or that I manage my own feelings or anticipate theirs in a difficult conversation? And then finally, at the deepest level, identity. That if a conversation feels difficult, there's something the situation suggests about you that feels at stake. When I look at this list, and by the way, this is where it's very culturally stable, I should say that, meaning around the world, the external rules for what you're allowed to say and in what contexts or how direct you would say them are different. But the internal reactions, this structure, is actually quite stable, that this is what human beings are preoccupied with. And it makes sense because, for instance, in terms of who's right, in a messy situation, I'm gonna focus on what I'm pretty sure I'm right about, because it feels safe, it feels secure. If I can stick to that, I'm not even gonna have the conversation unless I'm pretty sure I'm right. If I can stick to that, then I feel like it's not as uncertain, maybe. And so all of this is driven by human nature, but it's not helping us. But by the way, this is still where my internal voice goes. And I do this full-time for three decades. And I still know exactly what I am right about when we are in conflict, right? And I am, by the way. So what does this mean for conversation? Let's actually do another experiment. The first thing you need here is a partner. So groups of two, and if there is a group of three of you, just scoot over and see whether there's somebody down the row or behind or in front of you who might turn around. So first job is to find a partner. If you do need to move, do feel free to get up and move, because we're going to do this for the next 10 or 15 minutes. It's going to be a bummer just to sit. Okay. Anybody need a partner? Here's step number 2. As between the two of you, decide who has the better shoes. Okay. It's a difficult conversation. All right, let me have your attention. Whatever criteria you just used or negotiated into being, legitimacy, raise your hand if you were the person deemed to have the better shoes. Okay, we need to make sure we have one in each pair. Yes? Okay. Congratulations, better shod person. You get to be person A. Your partner, who had better things to think about today, they are going to be person B. Now, here's what you get by being person A. Person A, you get to hold your genuine view. So this is the question. The current polarization is pretty hopeless. So talking about issues with people who disagree takes time and effort, and it's unlikely to make a difference. Person A, decide what you believe about that. Are you for it? It's true? Or you are against it? You think it's not correct? Whatever your genuine view is, take it and take a one-sided view of it, because this is an advocacy exercise. So you're going to argue for, or you're going to argue against. Person B, we don't care what your view is. We don't care what your actual view is. You just have to take the opposite. Okay? So you've got to think on your feet, and your job is to advocate skillfully and well for the opposite view. Now, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to have this conversation. Any questions? Go. motion back up front. I'm going to interrupt. Here's what I want to know. Here's what I want to know. How many of you feel that your partner did a quite skillful job, quite high-level skillful job of advocating? Just a little feedback, just a little feedback. Awesome, okay, most of you. Let me ask this. How many of you change your mind based on your actual view? Whatever your actual view is, as a result of this conversation, you have shifted what you believe. Okay, so we've got almost no one. Almost no one. One or two for his scenario. Okay, we've got one or two. Okay, so by the way, what do we teach people in law school? Not much, exactly. Yeah. No. We teach them to think rigorously and advocate skillfully. So what's up? Because advocacy changed, even it was done well, changed very few people's minds. Yes. Advocacy is actually a very persuasive approach to take when the person that you are trying to persuade is neutral. They are a judge or a jury who are at least ostensibly working to be neutral. When the person you're talking to has a view that is already different from your own, advocacy drops to be the least effective strategy you can use. So, part of the problem we have is that, of course, we learn all these great advocacy skills in law school, then we take them home for our families to enjoy, right? And they don't do us any favors in many cases. So let's actually take a look. Advocacy as an approach to conversation has a very clear purpose, which is to persuade. As a result, you're busy sharing evidence and reasoning, et cetera, implications. And as you're listening to the other person, you're listening for what's wrong with what they're saying, right? What you can rebut or pick at or argue with or dismiss. Fair? Yeah. All right. Let's try a take two and try out a different form of conversation. It has a very different purpose, which is just to understand. We don't have to agree, but I just at least want to understand what you believe, and I want you to understand what I believe and why. So that means you're going to use very different questions or methods naturally, and you're going to be listening for what's right about their view, what makes sense about their view, or what you don't quite yet understand, so I've got a follow-up question for you. You're also curious about their past experiences and how that informs how they came to their view, for example. So we're going to try out this second version. Person A, you have the same instruction, your actual view for or against, and you're going to start out advocating for it. Person B, you still need to disagree, even if whatever your actual view is, just take the opposite view. However, your job is to understand and to demonstrate some conversational receptiveness to wanting to understand their view, as well as for them to understand yours. Clear? Okay, we're going to do 2 minutes. Go for it. attention. So what, if anything, was different about the second conversation? What, if anything, was different? Raise your hand. What do you think was different? Hold on, guys. I want to make sure everybody can hear. If someone's talking to you, stop listening to them. Okay, go ahead.
We actually did both before you went to the second.
Oh, you did both before I went to the second.
To see why the other one was right, and then, so we actually worked it out, so we didn't have to do the second.
Ah, interesting. So you cheated. That's what I heard. Yeah, good. And you started to see what might be right about the other person's view. Great. What else was different? Yeah, in the back.
I noticed that it took a lot more effort on my part.
Yeah.
To explain myself in a clear way, I suppose.
That's really interesting because I thought what you were going to say is it took more effort to listen to her, but it actually, what you were saying is it took more effort to understand my own view and express it clearly. That's actually not easy. That's a great insight, yeah.
The receptiveness led me to want to hear more.
Ah, interesting.
Was to extend the conversation, the exchange of information.
So you were more curious to stay in the conversation and felt the desire to learn more. That's really interesting. Keep going. What else?
There was less tension the second time.
Less tension. So that's, how many people felt less tension or awkwardness? Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because you were talking about the same thing, but you were just doing it in a different way. Other observations? Yeah.
So initially, I felt like a brick wall. Nothing he said, I was going to penetrate the brick wall because I knew I had to disagree with whatever I said. It was uncomfortable, so it's not my nature.
Yeah.
I had a lot of good points. I'm like, nope, he's still wrong. So the first time I was a brick wall. The second time I was more of a sponge.
Ah, so the first time, just so we get this on the recording, because it has to go through the mic, the first time you were consciously being a brick wall. And the second time you were being a sponge, like soaking up. Yeah, open pore, more porous. Yeah, one more.
Okay, so as a former English teacher before I became a lawyer, who learned how to diagram sentences
Yes,
and what conjunctions is.
I can't wait to see where this is going.
What I'm saying is here, we decided really after discussion that both those sentences, there really is no great disagreement. Both those sentences and positions essentially means the same. And I'll tell you why. First of all, the first one says the current polarization is pretty hopeless.
Yep.
So the modifier pretty is important to the second one. So pretty. And then just add a conjunction, you add therefore. Therefore, talking about issues with people who disagree, though while it takes time and effort, but, change the end to but isn't likely to make much difference. So you have first pretty hopeless, and then you have isn't likely to make a difference. So the other one gives more detail about possibly talking about it, but in fact, they both are pretty hopeless.
And so was it different the second time you talked about it in terms of how?
When first, because I followed directions, I disagreed, so I had to take.
Ah,
And then as
yeah.
I started analyzing from a real English point of view of what a modifier is in conjunction, I said, you know what? And he, well, she disappeared.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
both decided that there's really not much difference, much less difference than seemed apparent the first time around.
Yeah, so the second time around, the modifiers stand out, and it becomes more nuanced.
Pretty came in.
And you, yeah.
And isn't likely to make much difference. And they ended up coming closer together so that there wasn't really any disagreement at all between us.
Yeah, so because you're listening for where do we actually have overlap, the modifiers or the complexity or the nuance start to create some pretty visible common ground, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay, nice. So by the way, this is, everything that you just described is very consistent with the research. And this research is coming in part from a colleague of mine named Julia Minson at the Kennedy School, along with colleagues at the Business School and NYU. And what they're studying is conversational receptiveness. So signaling to your counterpart that you are receptive, that you are a little more of a sponge than a brick wall, And there are 4 behaviors that they're identifying that signal that receptiveness. I didn't even tell you what they were, but you naturally did them by shifting your purpose in the conversation. So the first is just showing interest and explicit acknowledgement about what the other person says. Sometimes we're listening to the other person, and then we go on to say what we want to say, and it's not clear to them that we actually heard and were acknowledging what they were saying. Listening for and emphasizing where you actually agree. Hedging your own views. By the way, I don't love the word hedging, but I think it is modifying your own views to be clearer about reality, which is this is how I see it, rather than this is what's true in the world. That's actually a more accurate description of views, generally. And then finally, ending in particular, reframing to the positive. This has been really helpful. This is what I've learned from our conversation. I really appreciate your willingness to take the time, etc. Be sure to turn to your partner and just say that sentence to them right now. Okay, enough appreciation. We're done with that. Let me tell you the outcomes. The original population that Julia and colleagues used were people who are sometimes described as anti-vaxxers. So we're not talking about COVID vaccine. We're talking about vaccinating children. And they were engaging them on the internet for a conversation. And the control group, because they're a population that has very strong views. That's why they chose them, and that would self-identify with those views. So the control group basically did what we did in the first round, which is advocated, shared data that didn't comport, told them why the studies that they were relying on had some problems, etc. The second group, not the control group, demonstrated conversational receptiveness in just the ways that you did. And here's what they found. They found that when you demonstrate conversational receptiveness, the other side automatically reciprocates that receptiveness. They are more likely to be interested in and willing to hear your point of view. They think you have better judgment because you are taking their views seriously, so you are obviously a person of fine judgment, right? They find your arguments more persuasive, which is interesting. They like you more, and they are more interested in partnering with you to discuss issues in the future. This feels like an America I want to live in. How do we create this together? How do we create spaces where we can have more conversations like this? How do we approach issues with a purpose of just first understanding why we see it so differently? Do these two see this differently, by the way? Someone once pointed out that they both might actually want to put it in their mouth, so maybe it's not so different. I want to do one more thing before we turn to questions, and for this I actually need 2 volunteers. The only qualities you need to volunteer are that you need to be able to read from, we're going to do a dialogue up here. So you need to be able to read quickly from a script. Your lines will appear on the screen. And secondly, you need to be able to do it with a little bit of dynamic flair. So I need 2 volunteers. Ooh, we got 2 volunteers. Come on down, guys. Come on down. Do we have our mics? Awesome. Tell us your names.
I'm Tim.
Hi, Tim. And? Masha. Masha? Yes. Awesome. Let's give these guys a hand. Okay, Tim and Masha. Tim, you are going to play the character named Louie.
Louie?
Louie.
Oh.
And Masha, you're going to play Kim. So Masha, we'll put you over here just to give you guys a little bit of stage presence. So here's the situation. This is a dialogue drawn from a TV show. In the TV show, Louie and Kim are married. They have a child. They've sent the kid off for the weekend so that they can have a romantic weekend together. In order to kick off the romantic weekend, on his way home from work Friday night, Louie has stopped to pick up flowers. He has brought home red roses. He has presented them to Kim. She looks at them for a moment, and then she says,
Listen, try not to take this the wrong way, okay? But we're gonna be together for the next 30 years, and I need you to know that red roses are not my thing. I really don't like red roses.
Okay, well, can I critique how you told me that? It's not that big a deal. I just think that you should have thanked me for the flowers first, then said the thing about the roses.
I've told you before that I don't like red roses, remember?
But still, I was thinking of you, so I bought you flowers.
If you were thinking of me, you wouldn't have gotten me red roses.
Oh, come on, Kim. I brought you flowers. That's a nice thing. You say thank you. It's called being polite.
You know what would be polite? If when I told you things, you actually listened.
Hang on. All I'm asking for here is a tiny bit of gratitude. So maybe they're not your favorite kind of flowers.
No, I didn't say they're not my favorite. I said don't bring me red roses.
What is wrong with you? Are you allergic to saying thank you to people?
How do you expect someone to thank you for giving me something that they specifically told you they don't want?
You know what's a better question? How you get given red roses and turn around and not act like this? And act like this. Sorry.
Scene. Thank you. Beautifully done. What talent we have around here. How many people can relate to this conversation? How many of you had a version of this conversation at some point? Yes, totally. All right. What is the topic of this conversation? Not listening. Whose topic is that? Kim's. Is there a second topic here? Not being appreciated. And whose topic is that? Louis. And Kim's. Say how?
You're not listening. I don't feel appreciated.
Yeah, so we could say that hers is related to appreciation also. Fair. So here's the trick. This is what we would describe as a classic switch track conversation. If you ask them what was this argument about afterwards, when the weekend was ruined, by the way, they might say, well, we were argued about the roses, but it's not really about the roses. And in fact, there are two topics here. A switch track is a train track where you're going along the track. There is a switch that will smoothly shunt the train off on a second track. What happens is Kim starts the conversation, and her topic is basically you're not listening. You never listen, because I told you before I don't like these red roses. So that's topic number one. Louis responds with topic number two, which is, can I just critique how you told me that? You should have said thank you first. What's interesting is that switch tracks are so smooth that the two of them go off on two different topics, and often they don't even realize they have two topics as they get further and further apart. Because Kim experiences everything that happens in this conversation as evidence that he doesn't listen. He still doesn't listen, and he's not listening right now. And Louis experiences everything that happens in this conversation as further evidence that she is absolutely ungrateful, and why does he even bother? This happens in our conversations about the complex issues that we're grappling with as a country all the time. And the question of just noticing, especially when we're each focused on what we are right about, and I'm going to cling to the things I feel certain about, that's my topic, what I think this is really about. But of course, the other person thinks this is really about something different for them. And we never discover why it is we're totally missing each other in the conversation. So the question of what is this really about? Two topics is optimistic. By the way, if you want to see this in action, topics going in every direction, go to a faculty meeting. Right? Should we do this policy? Why are you bringing it up now? We did that in the past. I mean, the number of topics on the table multiplies with each speaker. And we don't ever join to say, okay, actually, let's talk about that part. Have we tried it before? Or why are we bringing it up now? Et cetera. What do we predict is going to happen? What are the policy implications? Let's at least be on the same topic at any point in time. Now, the trick here is first just noticing that there are two topics going on, because this happens so frequently that part of what we're teaching people in law school actually is to listen closely, to identify those topics, to listen rigorously. But we don't do it in everyday life. And so we miss each other all the time. So the trick is just noticing them and then naming them so that we both are aware. So it sounds like for you, this is about X. For me, it's actually about something quite different, which is Y. And then let's figure out which should we talk about first. And my recommendation is you tip your hat to the other person's topic, because their internal voice is fired up and they need it to be heard before they will be receptive to you. So making the first move to be receptive yourself to hearing theirs is what will get that cycle, that virtuous cycle of conversational receptiveness moving. I want to end just with some good news, because we could use some good news, yes? Let's look at a little bit of encouraging news. We're actually not as ideologically polarized as a citizenry as we think that we are, okay? And in fact, 13% of Americans have views that are actually at the polls on given issues. So what that means is if you are a math major, 87% are somewhere in the middle, depending on the issue. They might move from one side to the other, or depending on the timing or the context or what it's really about. And there is actually quite a bit of ideological overlap on specific issues, but we differ on how important we think those issues are. So we agree that blah, 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 blah. However, it's not our biggest problem. I'm actually talking about a different topic, which I think is our biggest problem, and I'm voting on that topic in this election, for example. So just to give a couple of examples of those, and you know, I looked at a bunch of different polls. You'll get slight deviations in the specific percentages, but 64% of Americans support stricter gun control. 69% say abortion should be legal in the first trimester. And a whopping 81% believe, what do you think it is? That we're too polarized. And they wish it were different. And they think that we are too polarized as ordinary citizens, that our politicians are too polarized, that the media is too polarized, and that social media is too polarized. All of those come out with 80 and 81% agreement among Americans. So we actually want the same thing, which is to not have what we currently have. And so what helps? One of the ways that, one of the things that the Harvard Negotiation Project and Getting to Yes spawned was this idea of win-win negotiation. And it's actually a term that didn't originate at HNP, and it's a term that often those of us who are there don't love, because it's often very misunderstood. But what is also very clear is that there is lose-lose negotiation. And lose-lose is what feels like it's happening now, given the polarization, the fact that we're having such a hard time talking with each other and feel stymied and frustrated and afraid of each other. The work at the Harvard Negotiation Project, as Art mentioned, really came out of World War II. It came out of a very dark period of our history, where people said, we have got to find better ways to handle conflict as human beings. Those pioneers from that early period came out of World War II traumatized. Frank Sanders spent part of his childhood in a concentration camp and lost many of his family members. Roger Fisher fought in World War II, lost all of his college roommates. And they came home motivated to find a better way. So the question of how do we find a better way is an invitation, I think, to us in what feel like dark times in American politics. And as we look globally, it's not hard to think of a situation that is tragically and heartbreakingly lose-lose in Israel and Gaza. And what that conflict is about If you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 answers, each of which has merit for at least discussion. Can we hold the complexity of that situation with compassion and heartbreak and a commitment to support whatever it would take to help it get a little bit better as humans living alongside each other? I'm not meaning to simplify it, but actually to complexify it and to see the nuance, because it's not a stark either or. I also feel like one of the things going on between Democrats and Republicans is just who worries about what the most. And partly, I don't have to worry about a bunch of stuff because I know you guys are worried about it. So if it becomes endangered, you'll make a stink about it and be annoying about it, but it means I don't have to worry about it. So maybe Republicans worry more about individual rights and autonomy. So I don't have to worry about that, and Democrats worry more about, in a democracy, when the majority will rule, how do we make sure those who have a minority view or voice or population are taken care of? Both of those are important in a democracy. They are tensions that we have to hold if this democracy is going to be successful. The tension between individual rights and societal needs, and the tension between the majority rule and minority voices. But because we each worry about different things, we release needing to worry about the one that the other one has. What that brings us to is that a very useful question to have in your quiver when you have these conversations is this question. On any given issue, when you disagree, just asking the other person genuinely, tell me what you are worried about. If this goes the other direction, the way you don't think it should go, talk to me about what worries you or what concerns you. Because that will help us find things that are common worries. Because I actually think that Americans across the spectrum care an enormous amount about the democracy surviving and thriving. We each just feel threatened by the way the other side is handling it. And so if we can talk about what our worries and concerns are, I think that we might actually make a little bit of progress. In difficult conversations, we talk about moving yourself from being focused about what you're right about and whose fault it is, et cetera, over to a space of curiosity about why we see it differently. What are we each contributing to the problem that we should change and take responsibility for? How do we talk about the impacts we're worried about, concerned about, rather than attributing intentions? How do we handle feelings and identity in ways that help us stay grounded and to hear each other? I should reserve a little bit of time for questions, so we can turn to that now.
Raise a hand.
Yeah, we'll get you a microphone. Tell us your name. Chris, let's get Chris a microphone.
Yep. Just pass that along. We have 2 microphones. Pass it along so that we can get it on the audio.
So when it comes to difficult conversations between you and your husband, did you always have certain keywords or phrases to stop you from having that conversation turn into an argument? And I apologize if I'm asking too much into your personal life, but I was just curious when you were talking about the political stances of everything, and I know certain conversations like that can be very extreme at times, so.
Yeah, so you're asking, did we have any safe words? Yes, yeah. I mean, one of the things, and we were talking about this earlier today, one of the things that I think is the biggest difference between he and I is less our views, our ideological views, and more that he is very politically engaged, like he's a junkie, news junkie. This is recorded, isn't it?
And it will be posted.
And I am less engaged in the daily game of it all and feel like cynical about the game of it all because I'm like, I don't really care what the game of it all is happening. Like, I want to talk about the real issues with people I'm actually in relationship with where we have responsibilities for something. And so part of what happens is that I'm not interested in talking about the conversation if the conversation is about how the liberals are ruining the world. And I'm like, if you're going to want to have a conversation with me personally, then we can have a conversation. And so that's the negotiation that we have a little bit about whether it's about them versus us in either direction, which I'm not that interested in, or us as human beings. That I'm super interested in. And sometimes we can jump between them a little bit because of our natural just interests. Yeah. But I think it's also really important that I feel like I have a really clear picture of what an amazing human he is. And this is one thing about him where we disagree in a sea of things where we respect and care about each other. So I may not agree with or sometimes respect one or two of his views in particular. And I know that he has them for well-intentioned reasons. They're just dumb. No.
All right, let's try somebody. Try somebody on this side of the room.
You can call them.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things my partner and I were talking about, but is that a lot of what you're talking about seems to be more time intensive in the sense of being able to do this. Things have become very soundbite, very pithy type things. And would you agree that really the idea of interacting this way and then being able to find maybe more middle ground is really something that takes a lot of time that is often not available in many situations?
Give me a example situation.
Well, and I don't know, anymore I don't really have these types of conversations too often. So, in my previous life, in talking to constituents, because I was a legislator, there wasn't that much time. Sometimes there was, and I had some examples we talked about of changing people's positions 180 degrees, but you can't talk to everybody.
Right,
And all. So
absolutely.
And so
She's talking retail and you were talking wholesale.
and that seems to be, when you can sit down and maybe personalize something or show someone on that level, but it's a lot of times at 30,000 foot level that you're really talking about from the standpoint of most of us. And I'm assuming even on social media. I'm not on social media, so I don't know what's going on there. I don't have time to comment on things.
Yeah. So I asked because I think if we're talking about the big green rings, like how much time it would take to talk about big issues in big forums, yeah, absolutely. I'm more talking about conversations we're having with friends and family, neighbors, and in our communities about decisions that we are responsible for and where we can make a difference. I will also say that when I have a student, let's say, who comes to talk to me because they are upset about something, the most efficient thing I can do is do a great job of listening and understanding their complaint and what they're upset about. That's actually going to take way less time in our relationship to get to the heart of what they're actually worried about or concerned about than me defending or deflecting or whatever. So actually having a good conversation is super time efficient if I can get to the heart of it faster. And what's interesting is that I watch organizations and teams and boards and whatever go round and round and round for weeks or months, not hearing each other because they're not having the conversation to get to the heart of what they're actually each worried about, which wastes a ton of time. Also, if your goal is to change their mind, you're going to exhibit behavior that will push them and totally unintentionally on your part, push them to put up the bricks rather than the sponge. And that's hard. That's like a self-regulating. That's why I thought you might be talking about it was a lot of work to listen without wanting to get her to change her mind. So that's a little bit of a negotiation with yourself about it. They may change their mind after you hear them out and then you address the thing at the heart of it for them. That would be very efficient. And then they may or may not change their mind, but at least you've had a good conversation. Yeah. as it's passing, part of what we talk about in negotiation is diagnosing in a difficult situation, is this a structural issue? Is it a tactical or strategy issue that's causing difficulty, or is it an interpersonal communication issue? In this world, it's all three. Congratulations. Right? Because the structure of it in social media and the news and all of that is super complex. Strategically, people are having more extreme tweets, views, et cetera. So one of my co-authors, Bruce, is working on something called the Rebuild Congress Initiative. And they are working with congressional members to create bipartisan efforts. Simple example that's public, it used to be new Congress people would arrive, freshmen, and they would show up on the first day for orientation. They would be put on 2 different buses, and they'd be taken off to be oriented. And so one thing that they changed is that they now do orientation together. And so they're really thinking about structural things that will help build the kinds of relationships that we need. However, strategically, being open about that for those individual Congress people doesn't help them, right? To know that I'm reaching across the aisle doesn't help them get reelected right now. And so it has to be a little bit quiet. Yeah.
All right, next question.
Yeah, Lois.
Sheila, in one of your slides, you said that the issue is not so much a dispute about facts, but just the mistrust of news sources. But I think a structural issue is the failure to acknowledge objective facts. And I don't know how you can have any kind of constructive conversation when you know what the fact, there is an objective fact, but it's just not accepted.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of efforts going on to try to have fact-checking. It's not easy, actually. I'm putting this up just because it's a bunch of the sources, because some of these are sources where I was reading about efforts to have greater transparency or ways to check facts more easily. I agree with you about that. Yeah. Up in the back. Jay, can we
This
get the gentleman
over
in the
here.
back row? Oh, sorry, and while you're getting a mic, we have another one over here. Sorry, I messed with the process. Yes.
It's okay. So I'm going to ramble a bit before I get to my question, but when I looked at the announcement for this in our email earlier, it's always notable whenever it's a CLE, because then the crowd is very different. So I was thinking about whether or not your lecture would change if this was just a lecture you gave over the lunch period instead. So essentially, do you think, or have you found that there are similar conversational fallacies or attribution errors that exist between different generations, different ages, different demographics? And if so, why do you think that is, or why do you think that's something which doesn't, I don't know, why don't we learn generation to generation from those who came before us?
That is such a great question. I haven't seen differences in generation with human nature in terms of just attributing intentions, reacting by focusing on what we're right about, et cetera. I think there's a difference in how people use media, right? And the expectation that I see so when I was in my 20s, I was more brittle. I was more reactive to things, and particularly feedback to me, because any mistake I made was like huge. It was just evidence that I wasn't cut out for this profession or life or whatever, and I should just move home with my parents in Nebraska and hang up my professional hat. So I think that that's developmental just because you don't have a lot of data about yourself. So I don't think it's different about generations, but it's different about the phases of our life. Now that I'm the age I am, we won't say what that is, when I make a mistake, it's like, ugh, shoot. I thought I was further along, but I guess that's the next thing I need to work on or learn. And so I am less brittle. That's a slightly different answer to part of what you were asking, which sounded like it was, why don't we learn from the generations before? There's actually somebody in your row who was at a student gig that we just did last week. Do you want to say? No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I basically attended the same thing on Friday by accident.
Yeah. Do you want to say where it was and why?
Yeah. It was the Federalist Society Student Symposium. So we had people from all over the country, you know, right-wing lunatics. And she came and talked to us, and I quite liked it. So that's why I'm here tonight.
And
So-
did you get the right answers this time?
Well, I was the B person this time. I was A last
you were
time.
an A person.
Different
You
question.
learned to wear good shoes tonight.
Yeah.
So just, we did a similar session to this on Friday with students, and I haven't noticed differences in the response or thinking about it, but you've planted a good question. I'll have to think about it. Yeah.
Do you think if you were presenting to a room of lawyers and law students, you would find different conversational ways?
I don't know. What do you think? Do you have a hypothesis?
Nothing that's fully formed that I'd be able to state succinctly enough to not feel like I'm occupying too much time.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I get that. Part of what I see in law students and maybe in lawyers is that we're often really driven and we hold ourselves to really high standards and we feel like we should have well-formed views, and so we're a little more reluctant to, at least maybe I'm speaking only for myself, to admit, oh, I have something to learn, or that's new information to me, or whatever. Maybe just it's a professional, a self-selection bias for who becomes a law student and a lawyer, or maybe it's just the way that we talk about who we are as humans, as lawyers. But I don't know. It's a good question.
All right, this is our last question, this gentleman over here.
Yeah.
My question goes directly to you. I think going back into the profession that you were discussing earlier in Nebraska and what you're doing now, you seem to be very good at getting people to listen to you and having a lot of, I think, gathering. It just seems, I'm actually wondering why haven't you switched head to, you know, politician or some of that, where you're actually doing more of this, but for a much more bigger cause. So, like, what's stopping you from really going into the legislature capacity? I mean, you obviously have your husband, and you obviously have choices, but you seem to be very good at getting people to listen to you. So that's something that politicians should possibly have as a prerequisite.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I am hearing it in two ways. I'm hearing it as A, really kind appreciation, and B, we are really desperate for candidates, are we not? Thank you. Thank you. I mean, actually, it's not unrelated to what we're talking about, which is one of the things I learned from Roger Fisher and Bruce Patton and Doug Stone is that teaching is a negotiation. That I am negotiating at every moment for your engagement, your interest, your willingness to take risks, to admit, oh, shoot, I screwed that up, or that's interesting, that's new to me. And so I have to actually embody what I'm teaching and how I'm teaching it. And right now, the conversation, and we talked about this at the Federalist Society thing on Friday, the conversation on campus about speech is mostly about whether and what you can say. And I think we're talking too little about why and how we have the conversations that are most important. Why are we having them? What are our purposes? And how do we align the how with the why to have the highest quality, richest conversation that we can? Can I close with one last study?
Absolutely.
I just want to close with the one that I closed with on Friday because I think it's very aligned. So a number of years ago, researchers took students one by one. They told them, you're going to give a talk. It's in that building over there across campus. And on the pathway, they designed it so that there was someone who needed help. They were on the ground and needed medical attention. They got rid of the bystanders to get rid of the bystander effect. And what they wanted to find out was what percentage of people would stop to help. So based on your life experience, what percentage do you think stop to help? 0. Ooh, boy. 25. Anybody higher than 25? 70. Anybody higher than 70? 90. So we've got a huge polarized array. Not polarized, an array, as is true in most things. What'd you say?
We're talking about Phoenix, not New York.
Well, I asked this question in Canada once. The whole room said, agreed, 90%. I said, no, the study was in the US. They're like, oh, 5%. 5%. So it's interesting that we have such different conclusions based on our life experiences of what we expect from other people. That would be an interesting conversation.
But how badly were they hurt? If it's just someone
Well, they didn't stop to find out. That's notable. They didn't stop to find out. So it'd be interesting to have a great conversation about that. We don't have time, so I'll just tell you. 10% stopped. 10%. However, I will now tell you a little bit more about the students that they used, because they weren't just random graduate students. They were actually seminary students who were studying to be clergy. And the talk that they were told to give was on the parable of the Good Samaritan. The importance of stopping to help a stranger in need. So why do I tell this inspiring story at the end of our time together? Let me be really clear about my intentions. It's not to point a finger and say, oh, look at those hypocritical seminarians. It's to acknowledge that those seminarians are us. We know that there are conversations that we should be having, or we should take a little bit of time just to better understand. And yet, so often, we're so busy and distracted, rushing from point A to point B, step back into our regular lives. I wonder how many of those seminarians didn't even see the person because they're preoccupied trying to plan the talk. So the question is just, can we up our average as a country and as a community of the opportunities to just reach out a hand to connect with somebody and help them to the other side of an important conversation about anything, so that we stay connected as people, even as we have some hard conversations and disagree sometimes about the issues and challenges that we face. Good luck.
Don't go yet. Don't go yet.
I want to highlight one book up here. So this purple book, Remaking the Space Between Us, it is written by Diana McClayton Smith. It is coming out April 9th. It is the most inspiring book I have seen so far. I read the manuscript for her. It is chock full of case studies of people in communities who reached across divides. So pre-order it. It's fantastic, and it will make you feel so much better about where we are going.
And with that good news, we want to give you a little something.
Yeah, Mary, why don't you come on up? And so Sheila, Mary and I, everybody here tonight, want to thank you so much for being here. It's truly appreciated. As I was listening, I was thinking about the growing number of commentators, scholars who are concerned about the stability of our democracy, really thinking about the problems that you described. And of course, we can't seem to have anything except difficult conversations about climate change or immigration or healthcare or tax reform. And so no matter what it is, we're living in that era. And so your thoughts, your presentation tonight, your book, and I think importantly, your whole career, to the extent that it becomes more available and well-known throughout our country, I think can hopefully get us through this period. And so we truly appreciate your scholarship and your passion about teaching us all about how to have better conversations. And so we have a small gift, Mary and I have a small gift for you. We talked to your colleagues at the Harvard Negotiation Project about what would be a nice dinner evening there in Cambridge. I hope you like this restaurant. Julia, do you know that one?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. So please
Thank you very
use this.
much. Thank
And,
you.